I would imagine that there would be some difference. However, you know, specifically by law, the grand jury was one of three bodies that are specifically given the authority to look at internal affairs investigations concerning the conduct of peace officers and custodial officers. So they do have the ability, if it comes to their attention, to investigate those types of matters. And you know, in the past, I know that they have taken that on certain ones.
All right, Bob.
I'm going to be sacrilegious again. In my experience, and I've testified in front of grand juries, and I've represented people who were testifying in front of grand juries are blunt instruments. They very rarely do, in my view, helpful investigations. They tend to make a bigger problem. And I guess the way I'd want to frame it is to pose a question back. When I got to the Davis Police Department, I made a major discovery that was not within my purview, that the computers and the in-car cameras were not working. Everyone in patrol knew this. No one in administration knew it. Now, I don't know if you had a civilian review board that they'd discover it, and I don't know that a grand jury would discover it.
Barbara?
It's always hard to follow. You know, I think I agree with some of what Bob has said about civil grand juries. I found that in many times they make important recommendations, but they aren't followed up on, and they aren't taken seriously. If you're going to establish civilian oversight, my one caution is that be it a civilian review model or a civilian review board model, and I disagree with a lot of what Bob said, and I hope I get the chance to talk about that. But whether it be a civilian review board model or an auditor model, you want that model to have some kind of a way of systematic or systemic input to the disciplinary process. And civil grand juries just don't have that. So, you know, hook it in somehow. If you're going to go through the effort to establish it, make sure it has advisory or not, make sure it has a way to have some input into the process.
Okay. The next question will start with you, Sheriff Philp. What criteria would be used to select oversight committee members?
Well, that's a very good question. I don't know that I have an answer off the top of my head. As I mentioned before, the investigation of these types of complaints is a fairly complex matter. It's just not simply, I've got a complaint, let's look at it. I mean, there are a lot of factors involved, as well as, you know, the rights of the officers being investigated and privilege and those types of things. So at the least, it has to be someone that has a pretty well-versed working knowledge in police procedures and the law.
And the question was hiring?
It's what criteria would be used to select oversight committee members?
Okay. You know, I have to say that the police, so you're talking about a commission model at this point, I think. And the commissioners in Berkeley were appointed. What I looked for in commissioners were people who were thoughtful, people who have the ability to read and to read a police report and to read the rules and regulations and the law and to put that all together. So people who had the time to put into reviewing documents and to prepare for the hearings that they were going to have to rule on. I do think it's a complicated process, the investigative process, but I also think that people can learn. And you know, we welcomed presentations by the police department, and I think that if you give people the right information, they can make good decisions.
Chief Nielsen.
Well, I think for me, first and foremost would be expertise relative to police practices, employment rights of police officers, and I would say that to have any kind of credibility at all, I think doing regular periodic ride-alongs with police officers would be absolutely critical, because you can't know what that job's like unless you're out there riding in the car with them and experiencing what they experience day in and day out.
Right, Christina?
I would agree that they need some training, but I don't think that they need extensive training in that it's not rocket science. And I think that while, yes, they need to know all about police practices and what use of force is appropriate and so on, I don't think that it requires anything, say, more than a police officer.
All right, thank you. And the next question is for Chief Nielsen. The press has reported recently the current morale problems in your department. Would an oversight committee avoid such a situation?
Not likely. I think that you know, the issues, the particular issues that my department faces at this juncture have more to do with the culture of my organization, the fact that they have a chief who's come in from the outside and is trying to make some significant changes in an organization that has not had a chief from the outside in probably 20 or more years. So I think that those, you know, I'm not sure that an oversight committee would be of much assistance in dealing with those issues.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else care to comment on that question? All right.
Can I just say, I think that if there was a review board where the public could have gone during some of the tragedies, then there may be less angst directed at the department because people would have been able to go someplace else to direct that.
Okay, thank you.
And, you know, I think it's kind of a two-edged sword. I think that, as Christina said, that if people feel like they have some input and a place where they can come forward and have their issues heard and have them, or register their issues and have them heard, for sure. I think that can bolster confidence in the department. On the other hand, I think that, you know, sometimes having, as Bob said, bringing issues out into the open can intensify issues as well. As far as the internal issues, you know, I do think that when a chief comes in from the outside, I think it's tough. You know, so I feel for you.
Okay, any comments from Bob or Sheriff Phelps? All right, that brings us to 7:58, so I think we'll take our 5-minute break now, and please take a stretch, and we will start at 8:05. So we've got lots more questions, so please come back to hear more answers. Good questions left, and we'll do as many of as we can. And we'll just have 3-minute closing statements, and then we can ask more questions. There are several about budget here, and I'll just try to lump them all together and ask you to start answering. Bob, you could be first on this one. What would an oversight committee cost the citizens in dollars, and can you have adequate oversight without a paid staff? And do you make a profit, or are you paid, and by whom, for what you do?
And what do you do with that profit?
Okay.
I
Well,
hope
I'll
you can
start
lump
with
that
the
all
la-
together.
I'll start with the last part first. I have contracts as an independent contractor with both the city of Santa Cruz and the city of Davis, that they buy a certain number of hours a month from me that are discounted. And oh, by the way, typically I work almost twice as many hours as they're paying me for, because I'm nuts. You know, I didn't get into this business to make money. So am I making a profit? I don't know. It is possible to run a board without paid staff. It's not a good idea unless you want the board to be ineffective.